And there you go, kids. It's a piece of advice. It's a slogan. It's a sticker. It's a way of life. It's one of those things that if you see it on your computerized screen or telephonic device or whatever it is you've got, you can probably guess that it's a Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you're on Facebook and you're looking at me, Malcolm Tent, live, going off into the ether, over the wires, on the telegraph, over the phone, for this week's episode of Tent Talks Tunes. Yes, it's there's that cough again. I cannot be stopped by any damned annoying, erratic, dry hacking cough. I will not be stopped. Tent Talks Tunes must be talked about. The tunes must be spieled about, and I got to do my thing, baby. It's my genetic imperative, you see. Yes, we are here sort of in the afterglow, if you will, of the recent tide of Beatlemania. Yes. Beatlemania must be subsiding because, as somebody pointed out on the dreaded Facebook, which is, of course, where I am now and where you are now, we've been able to go about a day or two without the Beatles showing up in our news feed. So Beatlemania is starting to dry out a little bit, starting to damp down a little bit, and we're all sort of able to get back to our regular, normal lives, which brings me, Malcolm Tent, into my normal state of just record collecting fandom and geekiness. Let's adjust our camera a little bit. There we go. Answering the question, how low can you go? I want everybody to see my CIA t-shirt. One of Connecticut's first and greatest punk/hardcore bands. I will pay tribute to my honorable ancestors. Yes, bringing me back to my normal state of record collecting nerdiness and weirdness and absolute debauchery. We've gone right around full circle. I'm back where I was before Beatlemania kicked in because of that movie that everybody's been talking about. I'm right back where I was. I'm just a regular guy who likes the Beatles and loves to collect records. And in spite of doing Tent Talks Tunes for over a year, never really talked about the Beatles, unless it was some, random mention of some very strange, esoteric, bizarre pressing somewhere. Last week, if you tuned in, you saw that I had a great big stack of 12-inch LPs, and I went through them one by one, talking about the pressing histories and the label histories and the cover variations and the different mixes and all that stuff. Love that kind of stuff. It keeps record collecting geeks like me very busy. And just in case you missed it, I draw your attention to the fact that, where am I? Oh, there I am, way over yonder. I've got my YouTube channel, which I, of course, invite and or demand that you subscribe to, because there's a lot of good content on that. Look at that, now you can see it. Lots of good content. Many, many, many archived episodes of Tent Talks Tunes. We've got the Malcolm Tent Shoot interview series. We've got music playlists. We've got videos of me and my various bands performing live. There's a lot of groovy stuff on the Malcolm Tent YouTube channel. Plenty of incentive for you to go there and have a TV party tonight. Now let's check the monitor here. We like to check a few things before I dig into the topic at hand in earnest. We check the mailbox. We check the monitor to make sure that I am indeed going out live and people can actually see me and hear me and interact with me. Wow, according to this telephone here, I've just gone on live. Hello, Chad. Hello, Jenny DeSoto. Yes, Jenny DeSoto says, what movie, that damned Beatles 9-hour documentary that's been causing everybody to go gaga for the past several weeks? I don't even know the name of it, but it's a Beatles movie about the final days of the Beatles, and they're, rewriting history. Pair from Sweden, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a rewriting of the narrative of the final days of the Beatles, which up until the release of this new movie was universally and uniformly depicted as being grim, depressing, unpleasant, hostile, angry. Because of the movie Let It Be, you're able to witness the disintegration of a band before your very eyes. The narrative has now been rewritten. The narrative now says, well, it wasn't that bad. So I don't know. I haven't actually seen the new movie yet. I'm going to watch it at some point. So I'm reserving judgment. And I just think it's a kind of testament to the power of that band, that even though I haven't seen the movie, just having people talking about it is enough to reignite my interest in the Beatles. It's really amazing how pervasive they are in our culture and our musical landscape. And I make no bones about it. I love the Beatles. I'm wearing a t-shirt of Connecticut's one of the first and one of the greatest hardcore bands ever to come out of Connecticut. But I love the Beatles. And I'll bet you most of the dudes in the CIA love the Beatles as well. Toast. Danbury Tap. A nice big swig of Danbury Tap. To Connecticut hardcore and the Beatles. Love them both. All right, we checked the monitors. According to the monitors, I'm working. I would check the mailbox, except there's been no mail this week. A very, very slow mail week. It's kind of interesting that since I began mailing things out to people in deadly earnest, the mail has slowed down to a trickle. In spite of that, I'm going to tell you, I got stuff to send out. I've got records. As I just teased at the beginning, I got all kinds of stickers for myself, for the almighty anti-scene. I got records. I've got mysterious, enigmatic records that I like to send out to people when they send me cool stuff in trade. I got lots of got buttons from my other band, the Bloody Apostles. I've got albums down here. I love trading stuff by mail. So that's why I will remind you, my mailing address, Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. That's Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. A full mailbox is a happy mailbox. And I am happy to reciprocate and make your mailbox as overstuffed as humanly possible. Let's check the bulletin board, shall we? I'm surrounded by bulletin board. We have one very exciting event coming up in the Queen City of Charlotte, North Carolina. I refer, of course, to the Anti-Scene annual Christmas Cracker at the Tipsy Burro, our hometown gig. We love to do this every Christmas. I know you're saying Charlotte, North Carolina. You're in Danbury, Connecticut. How can that be hometown? Dude, it's my home away from home. Anti-Scene are my homeboys. They're my fam. So to go to Charlotte is simply being in another home in another city. And I love doing it. No problem, baby. 810 miles? Psh. Piddle. Piffle. A mere drip out of the faucet. Worth every mile of the drive to go and play. December 18th. 9 p.m. is the showtime. We will be sitting down and having a fellowship supper beforehand at the Tipsy Burro. They serve some wicked Tex-Mex cuisine. I, the vegan straight edge dude, am able to pig out at the Tipsy Burro. And any of you carnivores out there will do very well for yourselves. I've seen it happen. So come on down, sit and sup with Anti-Scene, meet and greet. Pose and preen. We'll do it all for you, with you, to you, and at you. And then at 9 o'clock we take the stage, which is actually just a piece of floor, and give you an up-close and intimate Destructo blast to the chest. And it's free. It's free. So really, you've got no excuse. If I can drive 810 miles to do it, I'm going to suggest that it's within your ability to do so as well. And when Anti-Scene hits the stage, we mach shall. Just saying. You don't want to miss it. And that, my friends, brings us up to date. Let's talk tunes, shall we? Last week, I talked about Beatles albums. And I had a pretty good little stack. This week we're going to talk about Beatles singles. And I got a pretty big stack. These are almost all for sale, because people have commented that when I do Tent Talks Tunes, traditionally I talk about stuff from my personal collection or things I just have a big working knowledge of. And people have said, hey, is that Howard Finster record for sale? And I'm like, no, it's not for sale. It's from my personal collection. And people get disappointed. So I don't want to make Tent Talks Tunes nothing but a sale show. But people have expressed interest in having the records for sale. So I'm going to go for it this week and dig into the Beatles inventory, or as you guys say overseas, the inventory of Beatles records. And a lot of these actually do kind of reflect my personal collection. So we're going to start by kind of reiterating some of the points I made last week about the Beatles' early career, which, you know, history's been revised many a time, but there's one fact that cannot be denied. And for those who try to deny it, I'm going to state it clearly and boldly right here, right now. One fact that can't be denied. When the Beatles were first brought to the attention of Capitol Records in the United States of America, Capitol wanted nothing to do with them. Capitol did not want to put out any records by this screechy, weird-looking English rock and roll band. As far as Capitol was concerned, rock and roll was dead. They never wanted anything to do with it. At least not after Gene Vincent stopped selling records. They didn't want anything to do with England. They did not want anything to do with Beatles records at all. Period. Capitol of Canada was a bit more enlightened. They released Beatles records pretty much from day one. Capitol in the US, no way. So that resulted in some very, very interesting releases of Beatles records from the early days. Excuse me. And I'm going to backstep just a little tiny bit and talk about the very first Beatles record ever in the US of A. This is before Capitol, or EMI, the parent company of Capitol, knew who the Beatles were. The first tunes ever to be cut on vinyl by the Beatles were on the Decca label out of Germany. And by some Byzantine process, there actually was an American release by the Beatles on Decca, but it was not the Beatles. It was by Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers. The Beatles were contract players to this guy from Liverpool named Tony Sheridan, who for a real long time was the #1 big top dog as far as being rock and roll showboaters went. They were playing Hamburg, Germany at the same time, and Tony Sheridan was contracted to record some sides, and the Beatles simply were the hottest band in Hamburg at the time. So they got signed to back them up, couldn't use the name Beatles, so they just called themselves the Beat Brothers. And the record was released in Germany. It might have done a little bit of action. Brian Epstein got it released in the UK, where it got a little bit of action. And Decca actually did release it in the US, where it had zero action at all. I mean, zero. They didn't even release it, as they just kind of like placed it into distribution and, you know, waited to see if anybody bought it, and nobody bought it, and that was the end of it. And I'm going to stand briefly corrected. The record came out in Germany on the Polydor label. Polydor, and there was a UK pressing on Polydor. The American version was on Decca, licensed from German Polydor. Okay, so this came out in 1961, the first appearance by the Beatles on vinyl in the US, and nobody knew. Nobody had any idea. Nobody cared in the slightest bit. It wasn't promoted. It wasn't pushed. Nothing. It came and went, making it a phenomenally rare release. We're talking about one of the rarest Beatles records you could hope for as an American pressing of Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers on Decca. Now, before you get your socks all knotted up, why is this guy waving so casually this incredibly rare Beatles record on Decca? If it's that rare, why is he just sort of waving it around in the air and, well, he just dropped it on his lap? How can he be so callow and callous and nonchalant about it? Because this, my friends, is what we know in the business as a repro. Sometime in the 1980s, an enterprising set of people decided to fulfill collector demand by making their own pressing of Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers on Decca. And in the true tradition of repros, because it's a very fine line to walk. What I've seen with people in the record business who make repros and make bootlegs, one thing I've noticed is a common thread is that they typically do things to distinguish the repro from the original. It's comparatively rare to find just a straight out counterfeit of a rare record that somebody will try to pass off as an original. It really doesn't happen that often. I think, looking at it cynically, I think it's maybe because record collectors really know their stuff. And if somebody tried to present a counterfeit version of the Tony Sheridan single as legit, an educated record collector would be able to pick it apart immediately and be able to tell you all the reasons why this is not real. You look at the matrix numbers, you can measure the space between the label and the run-out wax, you can count them, like there's any number of ways you can tell an authentic record upside down from a counterfeit record upside up, right side up. So most people who do these things don't bother. They always try to build in some difference between the repro and the original. In this case, the repro can be told very easily because it's on the old style 1950s Decca label. The actual Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers release was on the newfangled 1960s Decca label, which I don't have one at hand here because almost exclusively anything to come out on that Decca label was garbage. And I don't collect garbage. I'm not a garbage man. But you've probably seen it. Black label with a big, fat, wide stripe going horizontally with a band of colors and a white logo on top. That's what an authentic Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers record looks like. Record looks like. You'll have to pardon me, folks. I didn't get much sleep last night. I'm a little bit burnt. The repro, you can tell right away. It's the wrong label. It's the wrong era Decca label. So it's easy to spot. There are also numerous repros of this with the Decca promo label, which is pink and black. I'm pretty sure that record never existed to begin with. There never was a promo of that at all. Internet research team, let me know if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure that the promo version of this is pure fantasy. Never even existed. But it's a fun thing to have, because you're going to have to pay 4, maybe even 5 figures to get a real one of these. But if you're a collector and you just want to have some fun and have a space filler, you got the repro. They're fun. And it's a token of the first time the Beatles ever appeared on vinyl in the United States of America. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody cared. The record came and went, gone without a trace. You can bet that when I do my crate digging, I'm always looking for a real one. There might be one out there somewhere, some executive of Decca Records who was active in the early 60s is probably just waiting to die and leave that collection to a family who doesn't want it, who's going to put it in a tag sale next door to me. Whew, that's the scenario I live for. Excuse me. So we fast forward a couple of years to the time when, yes, indeed, Capitol has been offered the Beatles. Capitol has giving the big thumbs down to the Beatles. So George Martin, who was acting as the A&R man for the Beatles, tried to find any label anywhere that would release Beatles records. And he came across two of them. One was Vee-Jay Records, the great R&B label from Chicago. They released their version of the first Beatles album, and they also did what labels will do a lot. They repackaged, re-released, reissued, rejiggered, recombined the 12 songs they had the rights to in every possible combination that they could to sell Beatles records. Last week I talked about those albums. I'm going to address the singles a little bit. They had 12 songs, and they could do anything they wanted with them. So they released, who even knows how many singles. One of them was a very interesting combination of the Beatles version of Twist and Shout on the A, and There's a Place on the B. Now, Beatles singles in the UK were sacrosanct. Beatles releases in the UK, generally speaking, were sacrosanct because they were all released as the Beatles intended them. Each LP, each single. They were put out that way, they stayed that way, and that's the way it was. But when the records were shopped out to the various overseas territories, they were sliced and diced mercilessly. And there really wasn't anything anywhere to say that any label who had the rights to a Beatles record couldn't release it any way they saw fit. So Vee-Jay, they had 12 songs. They released EPs, they released singles, they released compilation albums, they released split albums. They just milked it for all they possibly could. And one way that they did was on their budget subsidiary called Tollie Records. Tollie was the label that would release stuff kind of, you could say, aftermarket. Like, if they had released a regular version of Twist and Shout on the Vee-Jay label, and it sold X number of copies and then kind of died out, they would do a re-release of it on Tollie at a budget price. And you would find these at Woolworths, at the local Five and Dime, at the local drugstore that had a little record rack. They were sold at a discount price, cheap, and quite plentifully. And most of the time that these records were bought were by people who were on a low budget or didn't really care, or little kids. So generally speaking, when you see these Tollies, they are beat to hell because they were made to be played, and they were played by people who didn't care. So it's very unusual to find these Tollies in any kind of good shape. This one's in real good shape. It's not quite mint. It's got a surface scuff. I don't know if we can see it. Yeah, you can see it. There's a surface scuff right there, but it's just on the surface. It doesn't actually play. The needle goes right past it, no problem. And that's really the only defect on this. It's super clean otherwise. And like so many records that I sell, this resided in my personal collection for quite a while. And as I'm fond of saying, I've only got so much room in my home, but my bank account has infinite room for expansion. So periodically I got to weed the records out. The records got to go, the money's got to come. So very, very clean version of this odd record from the halcyon days when the Beatles couldn't get a record deal in the US with their own record company. Sold at the local Five and Dime, and somehow actually taken good care of. I'd love to know the story behind it. I'd love to know the story of how this record that was made to be abused somehow escaped abuse. Very interesting. Another one that's kind of like that. When the Beatles released their single She Loves You in the UK, it went straight to #1, sold 1 million copies, huge hit. Once again, capital did not GAF. So George Martin again reached out, found whatever label he could possibly get to release this single, and came across a little itty bitty label called Swan. think Swan, and once again, as always, I invite correction. I think Swan was based in Ohio, maybe the Midwest somewhere. And they had some hits with Freddie Cannon. Link Wray was also on Swan. There was some good R&B stuff on Swan. But really, nothing of world-shattering note. They were not a big player. They were a small independent label. And they were the only label that had any interest at all in releasing this record by the Beatles. And they released it originally in November of 1963. And it went nowhere. It died. Those original 1963 pressings were white with red text. And as usual, somebody in the 80s did a repro of it. But they made theirs on colored vinyl. And I remember seeing those at the record swap meets when I was a kid, and I thought they just looked really, really cool. So much so that when years went by and I did my reissue of G.G. Allin and the Carolina Shit Kickers 7-inch single, I decided to pay my own tribute to the Swan repros by having my good friend Karen Wydeen from Florida design and execute my own takeoff on the original Swan label, and I had them pressed on colored vinyl just like those 80s repros of the Beatles records. To me, this is what is so much fun about releasing and collecting records. I get to do this myself with my own releases. I just love colored vinyl. And for the longest time, I wanted to do my own takeoff. For some reason, Swan, on their labels, I hope you guys can see this, had "Don't Drop Out" over there under the big S. They made a big deal of putting "Don't Drop Out" on their labels. And I wonder how many people actually took the advice of Swan Records and did not drop out. Me, being the somewhat cynical guy that I am, wanted forever to do my own parody of the Swan label, but with my own advice to all you reprobates, degenerates, and malcontents to, hope you can see that, just drop out. Drop out. Just drop out. Thank you very much. I, of course, do not advocate that you just drop out. It's just a little bit of fun. That's all it is. Just a little bit of record collecting fun. But yeah, drop out, baby. Just drop out. It's kind of like the snake that feeds on its own tail. That's what record collecting is. Talent borrows, genius steals. Now maybe Swan gave up the fight at some point, because after a while, when they, on later pressings or maybe alternate pressings of the Beatles' She Loves You single, you notice they kind of gave up on the advice dispensing. They apparently didn't care if anybody dropped out or not, and they let people up to their own devices. So there you have two, count them, two collectible variants of the Beatles' She Loves You on the independent Swan label from 1964. And like so many of these early Beatles records, hard to find them in good shape. These are both in very good shape. Very good shape. Let's check the monitors real quick and see who's tuned in and if anybody's got something to say about Beatles records. Let's see here. There's the monitor. How do you guys look? Jenny DeSoto says, Hump Blues on the Swan label. Who does Hump Blues, Jenny? I love the title right off the bat. I'm sure that's got to be hot. Maybe post a link if you want it. It sounds like a song I want to hear. The Hump Blues on the Swan label. Jenny, please let me know what that's all about. I need to know. Now, When I mentioned earlier about how the record companies would do whatever they wanted with the songs at their command, Capitol Records, once they finally got on the ball and started releasing Beatles records, did the exact same thing. They would release basically anything they wanted as a single. And like Vee-Jay, they had a budget line. Their budget line series was called the Capitol Starline. And the Starline records were the, cheap reissues. After a record had gotten everything that it was going to get in the regular price marketplace, they'd knock out something on the Starline label and throw it out there on the cheap for the Kreskys and the Grants and the J.C. Penney's and whoever had a budget discount record rack. They would just crank these things out simply to fill those budget bins. And this one's a really weird combination. I don't know how they came up with this one. Kansas City on the A side and Boys on the B side. And as you can tell, this one belonged to Peggy Sniderman. She valued it very highly enough to put her name on it. But it's kind of the same deal. These records really weren't meant for big time, serious, hardcore consumption. They were made in relatively small numbers. And the people who bought them were low budget, little kids, didn't care, and would write their names on them and play the hell out of them and then throw them away. So they're hard to come by. And I got one right here. Now you can always tell, and this kind of falls into the, I guess you would call it the repro courtesy category. You can always tell the Starline, whether it's upside down or right side up, from a regular Capitol release, because the Starlines, as you just saw, are shades of green, and regular frontline Capitols are shades of orange. And I hope you guys got the Bill Wyman reference when I said that. Shades of orange. Wink, wink. So yeah, Starlines. Weird combinations of songs marketed for people who really didn't care one way or another. Got one right here. It was mine. Can be yours. Now, one thing I will say about Capitol, and I've said this before, I don't apologize for Capitol. They're just a major label. I hate the major labels. They're cynical, greedy bastards driven only by money. But I will say that at the time, and for a long time actually, Capitol had a great graphics department, an in-house graphics department with a very striking look. And they were always very conscientious about releasing records with picture sleeves. Not every label did picture sleeves. Because they cost more money to print, and if they cost more money to print, it cuts into the profit margin, and therefore they're not desirable. But Capitol was pretty good about picture sleeves, and they did lots of great picture sleeves, including this one. I really love this one. It's simple, it's effective, it's got a photo that never really appeared anywhere else, and in the classic double A side tradition, on one side it touts Lady Madonna as being the A side, and on the other it touts The Inner Light as being the A side. And The Inner Light's one of those great obscure Beatles B-sides. In the true tradition of awesome 45s, when these records first came out, neither the A side nor the B side were on an album. It was a single only release. You had to buy the single to get this. As time goes on and greatest hits packages are made and albums are reissued, typically the A side is the one that would always get put on the greatest hits or on an album like the Beatles again, whereas the B side was never reissued. You could still get it as a 45, but you typically couldn't find it on an LP. And that's why singles are so much fun. The Inner Light is one of George Harrison's Indian raga influenced songs, and I love that stuff. I love ragas. I love Indian classical music. The sound of the sitars and the tamboras and the tablas and the other instruments whose names I can't pronounce. Just a wonderful, wonderful effect. And I think George attacked Indian classical music with real gusto and enthusiasm and came up with some really cool stuff. So The Inner Light's a song that you just really don't find everywhere. But here it is on a single with a picture sleeve and the original Shades of Orange Capitol label. It's not in the best shape, but it plays through okay. I gave it the listen. And, the Beatle, the sleeve's not in the greatest shape, but it's there. You can see the front, you can see the back. It's just a fun record to have in your collection. And, for me, it's a win-win. If nobody buys it, I get to keep it. I think I do have enough room in the home to stick one Beatles record into one box. It only takes up that much space vertically and that much space horizontally. You're welcome to buy it, though. Now, of course, the Beatles, like many artists, tried to take control of their own destiny. And up until very recently, it was extremely difficult for an artist to control their own destiny. Especially when you were an artist of the stature of the Beatles, you were very much tied into the major label framework. The majors were needed strictly for their distribution power, their ability to press massive quantities of records in a short period of time and get them out to market quickly. Nowadays, not so much. But the Beatles did attempt to take control of their own destiny by starting their own record label, which of course was Apple. And like everything the Beatles did, I hope you guys can see this, it's very artistically done. Very tasty. I mean, kind of like the Lady Madonna sleeve, it is simple, it's bold, it's effective, it does not mince words. And it was done with the full approval, at least initially, of all four Beatles. The label, that's a strong, strong design. It looks even better on LP, but even on 45, just a big, fat image of an apple on one side and a big, fat image of an apple cut in half on the other. That's got weight. That's got a lot of weight. And you couple it with a very simple picture sleeve, you got gold, people. You got gold. Now, this one in particular, this one, The Ballad of John and Yoko, this gets my vote for, I think, probably the weakest Beatles A-side ever. And you guys are more than welcome to chime in and tell me what you think about that. I think it's a weak song. I think it's a very weak tune. I think it's a slab of self-pity from John Lennon. I think the music is pleasant and it's engaging, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And basically all the things that John Lennon sings about were events of his own making. It's a pity party. I don't like pity parties. I don't do pity parties. The Ballad of John and Yoko is a pity party. I give it credit because it's probably the first record ever to use the word Christ as part of the chorus. Not only that, Christ said very angrily, "Christ, you know it ain't easy." And for him to say, "The way things are going, they're going to crucify me." Got to admit, that's a bold statement for the late 1960s. That's a bold statement, especially considering how much trouble he got into with his Jesus remark just a few years earlier. So I give him big fat marks for actually releasing this record with those lyrics. That took some cojones. The song itself, though, I think it's pretty slight. I think it's really maybe just a vehicle for John to get away with saying, "Christ, they're going to crucify me," on a record and get away with it. That's my opinion. Let's check the monitors. Who's got an opinion on that? What do you people think of The Ballad of John and Yoko? Nothing yet, but we know there's a lag. I'll check it out later when I read everybody's comments on the big screen. So I think it's a slight song, daring and bold but slight. But as so often happens, the B-side, Old Brown Shoe, once again by George Harrison. Old Brown Shoe steals the show. George's songwriting was unorthodox. It was whimsical. It was weird. His lyrics were eccentric. I love the stuff George Harrison did with the Beatles. Love it. Someday, somewhere, I'm going to make a mixtape of nothing but the George Harrison Beatles songs. There's like 20-something of them. And I think that would make a bodacious double album. Or Crammed in the Grooves budget album. Either way, it's been on my kind of sort of want to do list for a very long time. So Old Brown Shoe steals the show. The Ballad of John and Yoko, weak song, good intent. I'm sure it shocked a few people. I hope it did. People need shocking. Joe and Josephine, Normal America, need to be shocked. They need it. Stone Cold Original Apple, picture sleeve, great shape. Is mine, can be yours. Play it for your neighbors. Maybe you can still shock them. 1976, the Beatles' contract with Capitol underwent some kind of strange revision, and all of a sudden, Capitol was releasing Beatles records left, right, and center in every possible configuration they possibly could. Just like the days of the Capitol Starline. Except these are all frontline issues on the Regulation 1970s Capitol Orange label. And I remember when these all came out, 1976. I was in the 6th grade. I was just starting to get into record collecting big time, along with my other hobbies. For a long time, for me, record collecting coexisted with stamp collecting, coin collecting, and comic books. I don't really collect comic books anymore. I don't really collect stamps anymore. Still love my coin collection. And obviously I'm here talking about records. So when these came out in 1976, it was very exciting because they were heralded as being new Beatles releases with picture sleeves, with songs that had never been released as singles. In this case, Obladi, Oblada, and Julia. Numbered, just like the original White Album. And they did pretty well. They kicked off yet another wave of Beatlemania in 1976 and sold a lot of records. And as usual, they came and went. This was never reissued as a picture sleeve, I don't think. Not in such great shape, but it's still an interesting artifact from a certain period, a certain time, a certain marketing strategy. Now, one marketing strategy that Capitol did get right, and these, I'm not sure when these came out. These must have been in the 90s at some point, or in the early aughts. Can't really read. I'm sure I'm making a very funny face trying to read. I can't see. I can't see. One thing the record company got right, goddamn them, was they started reissuing Beatles singles in repros of the original picture sleeves. And they were faithful, just like the originals. And once again, you can see, especially with this one song touted as the A. Whoop, there's the other song touted as the A. One song touted as the A. Well, the other song touted as the A, so you cannot lose. Actually, that's, nope, same on both sides. This one's pretty cool because sharp-eyed collectors will notice that Paul, who in the original picture was holding a cigarette, is not holding a cigarette anymore. They airbrushed the cigarette right out of his hand. That's a surefire way to tell the original from the repro. But they kept the same label design, which they hadn't used in decades. And they just did a pretty good job at reissuing their own stuff. As always, the eagle-eyed collector can spot the difference. The reissue's got the, listen to this, the ridges around the label, and of course a different typeface and, you know, different disclaimers around the edge of the label. But otherwise, it is very, very close to the original, and thus a lot of fun to have. The reissue of Help and I'm Down, you can spot in a second because it's printed on a thicker cardstock. The originals were paper. The reissue is thick. But they also did a pretty good job at reproing the original capital swirl label. And this time the B-side goes to Paul McCartney, doing a real good little Richard imitation. They're fun to collect. Now, I'm not sure if these came out before the picture sleeve reissues or after the picture sleeve reissues. I believe these came out before. These were in the dark days of the 90s. And this is where I get back into my absolute, utter hate for the major labels. And if anybody from a major label is watching right now, I hate major labels. And I will repeat that as often as needed. And I'll get into it in depth right now. One of the many, many, many reasons I hate major labels is because in the 90s, they actively worked to destroy vinyl as a format. And of course now, in the early 21st century, they are cynically trying to bring back vinyl as a format because they see it as a cash cow. And because of their bullshit Adam Sandler reissues or issues, because of their stupid shit pop rap vinyl issues, a guy like me can hardly get a record pressed anymore because the pressing plants are all clogged up with orders for shit Adam Sandler soundtracks and fucking garbage like that. The stuff is garbage to begin with, and it's ruining my ability to press records. And it's all the major labels' fault. Fuck the goddamn major labels. I say that with sincerity, honesty, and conviction. Fuck them. But getting back to the 90s, even as the major labels were trying to destroy vinyl as a medium, they were not above cranking out stuff for the collectors, including a huge series of colored vinyl Beatles 45s, which were labeled somewhat mysteriously. You can see that. Oops, I almost had it in focus. Let's get way in there. Can the camera handle it? Not really. But it says for jukeboxes only. Not quite promo only, not quite not for sale, but for jukeboxes only! Exclamation mark. What the hell that's supposed to mean? I don't know. But very interesting combinations of songs. You know, some of them you might expect. Yellow Submarine with Eleanor Rigby. I think that was a single at one point. Of course, on yellow vinyl, yeah, great. Keeping in mind the majors had never pressed colored vinyl, or I should say, rarely ever pressed colored vinyl of their own volition. But remember, in the 90s, colored vinyl was hip. So Capitol, the scumbags that they are / were, attempted to jump on the colored vinyl bandwagon and the vinyl bandwagon by releasing scads of Beatles 45s on colored vinyl, some of them straight reissues, such as All You Need Is Love and Baby You're a Rich Man on pink vinyl. Others of them a little more esoteric, you know, getting into the Starline tradition of Beatles. Trying to find some odd combinations here. Actually, these are all pretty orthodox. There are some weird ones. But here's one that never came out as a single. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band on the A side, and A Day in the Life on the B side on clear vinyl. Pure cynical cash-in. Having said that, as a guy who loves records and loves colored vinyl, I love them. Oh my God, there's probably 50 of these things And it's just a lot of fun to try to get the set. It's kind of like Bruce Springsteen said, and we all know I don't like Bruce Springsteen very much. But Bruce Springsteen did say one thing that was very good and very intelligent. He said, don't trust the artist, trust the art. Or maybe vice versa. Trust the art, not the artist. I don't trust the label. I don't like the label. But let's face it, kids. I love the product. Love it. Love that vinyl. I love the weird fact that it says for jukeboxes only. I love it. I can't help myself. Can't help myself. And it's kind of funny that in the middle of all that colored vinyl, the weird one is the one on black. Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You on black vinyl for jukeboxes only. That's kind of cool. Treating black vinyl as part of the series. I like it. I like it. Let's see, what other kind of weird ways could stuff get reissued? Picture discs. Picture disc mania was sweeping the U.S. right around the same time as that wave of Beatlemania. These are from the 80s, and they're British. She Loves You and I'll Get You. Not on Swan, but on UK Parlophone picture disc. And then we got one that I can't read. There we go. I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy. I don't know if they're really artistically valid. In fact, I think they're kind of ugly. But they are what they are. What are you going to do? We got to collect something. Now, what I mentioned earlier about different territories being able to reshuffle the deck, the EP was a format that was used for that a lot. And the Japanese did quite a bit with that. Look at that. That is a beautiful Japanese EP with a great selection of songs. Same deal, featuring photos that you don't really see anywhere else. And this one, if you look very carefully, it's got the same photo, but Paul's got the cigarette. He's got the ciggy in his hand. He's got the ciggy in his hand. And he wants to smoke. Yes. Period correct. All Japanese. On the Japanese EMI Odeon label. Odeon being the same as the German and European label that Beatles records came out. I love these Japanese form-fitting record sleeves. The Australians do that too. I think that's really cool. And the Japanese EPs also typically come with a nice insert with the lyrics in English. And I haven't read these lyrics, but a lot of times the Japanese translations of the lyrics into English were done phonetically. And they read like something from a Salvador Dali novel. They are surreal. They are from another planet. I have found some of the most amazing translations into English on Japanese record covers you could possibly imagine. So I haven't checked any of these out, but I'm hoping. Look at that. Later period. Great photo. Never seen that photo anywhere else. Covered in authentic Japanese script. Love it. Just love it. Even in this one case, there was a photo session. There's a whole bunch of photos from this session that have made the rounds. I've never actually seen that one before. What's on this one? Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, Good Day Sunshine, and Bad Boy. That's a weird selection to throw Bad Boy onto that EP of 1966-67 tracks. What's on this one? That one makes a lot of sense. That one makes a lot of sense. But this one does not make a lot of sense. And that's where collecting these foreign pressings gets to be double fun. Because sometimes the collections of songs are completely nonsensical. Mexico is another country that ground out boatloads of 4-song EPs. Tons of 4-song Beatles EPs. Some of them totally period correct, like this one here. It's got I Want You, Don't Let Me Down, Revolution, and Year of Blues. Totally period correct. Picture sleeve is not much to look at, but it is unique to Mexico. It's got the Spanish translations of the song titles, which I love. I Want You, She's So Heavy translates into Te quiero, ella es muy pesado. Don't Let Me Down, no me abandones. No me abandones. No me abandones. Your Blues does not have a translation. Interesting. Now see, there's a great example of the bold Beatles Apple label with a small hole. Unique to Mexico, it is compacto. And as it does say on most Mexican pressings, el disco es cultura. El disco es cultura. The record is culture. Who the hell is going to argue with that? The record is culture. El disco es cultura. God damn, that's cool. Here's a 1964 era selection of songs. I'm going to guess that their line was the Jet 45. That's cool, man. That just looks great. Jet 45. And this one's on a large hole EMI, which signifies an 80s pressing. These records were simply not sold north of the border. You could stand in Nogales, Arizona, and not be able to purchase one of these, but walk across the border to Nogales, Sonora, and buy one. I love that. Exclusive to the Mexican market. Very, very cool. And a bunch of these were issued later in just generic EMI picture sleeves, but are still really neat. What's on this one? Can't read it. There we go. Tell Me Why. I'm down. I feel fine. And she's a woman. Ella es una mujer. When I play Mexico, it's always fun because my Spanish is just bad enough to be a source of amusement. Just good enough to sort of fumble my way through a set. Just bad enough to be hilarious to people who speak Spanish. This is a weird one. It's on the Apple label with a big hole. And it's got Honey Don't. Man, I need new glasses. I just need new glasses. Honey Don't. Little Child. I Want to Be Your Man. And one other one. Oh, Matchbox. So 2 Ringos on the front. Actually, 3 Ringos and 1 Lennon McCartney. And when you hear 3 Ringo Starr Beatles songs in a row, you would think, why on earth do these guys have records out? This is not very good. But it's the Beatles. And why they didn't just do an EP of 4 Ringo songs? Why 3 Ringo songs and 1 non-Ringo song? And on top of that, why Little Child of all songs to choose? You know, that's the regional office in effect. Betcha you won't find this record anywhere else except on the Mexican pressing. Viva the Mexican pressing. This is what makes record collecting so much fun, kids. And this is why I've got all these dang Beatles records. And why they can be yours if the price is right. One thing I've never done in my record collecting career is gone shopping for records in Mexico. And I really, really want to do that because Mexico and South America in general had a rich and vibrant garage punk rock scene in the 60s. And a lot of great bands who just never, ever got heard of north of the border, literally. And some of the stuff is fantastic. And I would just love to go down there at some point and do some shopping in person for some real authentic Mexican rock and roll and weird authentic Mexican pressings of bands from Gringolandia. Gringolandia, see. So that pretty much wraps up the Beatles 45 roundup. Hope you guys enjoyed this little discourse about probably my favorite format. The 45 is probably my favorite format. I just love 45s. When you release a 45, it's got to be good. There's no room for filler. It's got to be all killer, unless it's a willfully throwaway B-side, which in case makes it still cool. So 45s in general, Beatles 45s specifically. And that is this episode of Tent Talks Tunes. I want to thank everybody, as always, for tuning in. It's my pleasure to yap about music. It is my fervent hope that you subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can get more of this stuff. It'd be awesome if you guys can make it down to the Tipsy Burrow in Charlotte on December 18th for a free anti-scene show. If you can't do that, just keep in mind that there is a brand new anti-scene album in the works. It's called Great Disasters. When I'm in Charlotte next week, I will be cutting the bass tracks for the album. And speaking as someone who's not just the bass player, but also a raving fanboy, this new anti-scene record is going to kick some serious buttocks. I said it. You can put it in the bank, kids. Speaking as a fan. So that's it. I will not be here next week because of that. And I'm not too sure about the week after that. But absolutely, as 2022 dawns anew, it is my intention to be back with more tunes and more talk because I am Tent. So until we do meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.